As Vice Chairperson of the Animal Shelter Advisory Committee, I hereby call this meeting to order at 12:08 p.m. At this time, the committee welcomes any public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Committee members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The committee takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Are there any members of the public who wish to make comment at this time? There being none, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as published.
Motion.
I hear a motion from Member Carpenter.
Second.
And a second from Member Murphy. Calling for the vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Consent agenda approved unanimously. Moving on to the regular agenda, first item is consider approving the May 19th, 2022 Animal Shelter Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes.
I'm sorry, Chair. We're on item 4A.
I am so sorry. Going to the discussion and possible action on positive rabies specimens for 2022.
Thank you for that. We do have a couple of Morgan Chegwin, Assistant Director of Neighborhood and Family Services. We do have a couple of positive rabies specimens to update you on. So let me get you those details. Okay, so first, a citizen presented out of Schleicher County, just outside of El Dorado, Texas. June 7th, 2022 was when she brought her first specimen in. We did identify that she had a couple of striped skunks that were positive for rabies. So she brought one specimen in, did find it in the same housing area as where her community cats reside. So when she caught a second skunk, she brought that one in as well. They were both tested positive for rabies. There's an unknown vaccination history. Much of that community cat colony was young, under 4 months of age, so they were not legally required to be rabies vaccinated yet. And so we did refer her to and connect her with our staff at the state Department of State Health Services to advise on how to proceed. They did give her some background on rabies movement in that area that they were aware of. And so our role in that was simply obtaining the specimen, sending it to the lab, and notifying everyone of the results. She was, of course, all her dogs on the property were current on rabies vaccine, so we averted any, exposure there. I do believe she eradicated her cat colony to make sure that they could control the spread of rabies, and will continue to just be vigilant about keeping all of her pets current on a rabies vaccine now that she's aware of the issue in the area. So this was not an uncommon occurrence when the state became aware of it and aware of the location of her property. This was not something unusual for them, just something to stay on top of and be aware of.
Does this happen often where people come from outside our agency?
It happens occasionally. So, of course, we can only respond to calls for service inside city limits. We only accept animals from inside city limits, but they brought us the remains of a skunk, and we take a fee to obtain the specimen and send it out to the state lab. It is not common, but does happen occasionally, less than a half a dozen times a year. Folks that are ranchers and used to rural living are often just well versed in, hey, I've got to keep my dogs current on their rabies vaccine. I know those species that are top 5 carriers for rabies, and so if I see, a skunk, a raccoon, a fox acting strangely on my property, I'm gonna assume the worst. And so it's quite common that they actually don't test at all and just make sure their animals are current on a vaccine and possibly even just shoot the wildlife that's acting strangely. So it's not common, but it is a service that we offer. We did have another case. here in town. So just a couple days later, and also just to speak to kind of normal patterns related to rabies, we have a skunk season. A skunk mating season is usually every February. And so we see a lot of movement and migration in skunks. And since they are adapted to live longer with the rabies vaccine, that's also when we see a lot of our positive specimens related to skunks. Because the last 2 winters we've had quite harsh freezes during February, we have not had any positive rabid skunks. We haven't had a normal skunk season, I would say, since 2020. And so to have a skunk positive for rabies in June is quite unusual, but we know that, nature, wildlife has suffered and is adapting to these extreme weather events that we've had. And so we usually do have several rabid skunks a year, but it's just unusual timing. But it is because they didn't have that normal mating season in February, that they're all kind of at loose ends of when to proceed with their migration patterns. So bats are something that we can get positive specimens for really year-round. There's not a bat season per se. But it was unusual that just a couple days later, on June 9th, we did have a citizen present a bat for testing. She has 3 dogs at her residence, and one of them came in with the bat in their mouth, and all of them were in the room with the bat on the floor. So we did test the bat, and it was positive for rabies. So all 3 dogs, we got the vaccination history on. All of them were current on a rabies vaccine, including her 4-month-old puppy. So we really appreciate pet owners being responsible and getting those vaccines in accordance with their veterinarian recommendations and state law, because that saved that puppy. It really provided some assurances for that exposure. So when a pet is current on a rabies vaccine, the state orders a 45-day home isolation. And so those animals are only let outside for restroom breaks on a leash. The owner wears latex gloves to feed and water their pet, because rabies can be shed through the saliva. And so that's a 45-day period to do that for all 3 dogs. This resident did complete that 40-day home isolation. And just as an aside, if any of those pets hadn't been current on a rabies vaccine, that is a 90-day home isolation. So it just doubles that time period. The resident is also provided signs of early indications and early symptoms of rabies, and is told to report those immediately. We continue to follow up during that time period, and then at the conclusion of the 45 days, just to confirm that everything is A-OK, and all pets survived that exposure just fine, no issues, no rabies contracted by the domestic pets. So those are your positive rabies specimens.
Any questions? The next item is 4B, discussion and possible action related to monthly shelter numbers for May 2022.
So for May usually starts our busy season, and we did see that happen in our community. So our intake increased to 403 new arrivals at the shelter. That is up 10% from the month prior, but is largely flat with May 2021. That's about normal for us for May. May is when dog intake usually starts in earnest and cat intake increases. Adoptions were at 52 for the month. Transfers out to rescue were at 84. 72 animals were redeemed by their owner. 26 wildlife animals were released. 82 were deceased, and I do have more information on that. That is quite high for us. So that left in our custody 399 animals at the shelter, 128 at Concho Valley Paws, and 6 off-site at either home quarantine, medical support. And so our live release rate for May was quite low at 74%. That is below goal for us to be 90% for the year, and that is largely driven by a cat illness outbreak. We had 64 cats die or were euthanized on the property. And that was largely due to a panleukopenia outbreak or feline parvo. We had 15 dogs that died and 3 other different wildlife that died. Another way to break that down is by reason for death. We had 71 of those animals were sick, injured, or failure to thrive. And 11 dogs were euthanized for aggression. So outcomes by type, our biggest figure we're watching there is that 12% of our animals were deceased. Quick math there shows that 88% of our animals were released alive. So anytime that deceased is greater than 10% is a call to action for us, because that means that we're not meeting 90% and at risk of not meeting it for the year. So we did see some decreased performance. There are a lot of things feeding into that. The feline component was a big contributor to that.
Moving on, discussion and possible action related to monthly shelter numbers for June of 2022.
Thank you. So for June, we saw 400 new arrivals, so almost flat with May that we just presented, so still in line with our busy season. That is a decrease from June 2021 of about 17%. So since the shelter is at capacity and has been full related to canine housing, we have been sharing a lot about intake diversion, trying to keep pets in a good Samaritan situation where a finder holds onto those pets for a couple of days while we try to find the owner. And so we do attribute that to the reason for the decrease in intake. 142 animals were adopted, which is amazing performance. 35 animals were transferred to rescue. 52 were redeemed by owner. That is quite low for us. We are seeing year over year owner redemptions are down. Some of that is livestock. Our livestock response, the volume of calls for livestock is not down, but the quantity, the number of animals that are livestock is down a lot. Last year we had a lot of calls for like 20 goats loose and 7 horses loose. And so we would have those 20 goats loaded up and returned to owner. That creates a lot of volume for return to owner. You do that a half a dozen times a year, and that's a good many number of animals. So our calls for livestock are not down, but the volume of livestock loose year over year is down. And so some of that redeemed by owner is skewed by that. We have a very high rate of return to owner for livestock. 23 animals were wildlife release. That's quite common for us. 137 animals deceased. This is quite high for us, and I do have more information on that. We had 546 animals left in our custody. That's 403 on-site, 129 at pause, and 14 off-site, either at home quarantine for rabies, medical treatment for veterinary issues beyond our care. So our live release rate for June was quite low at 64%.
I do have a question, and you may have answered this before, but what is the actual number of capacity that the shelter can handle animal-wise?
So it can, we don't have a finite policy that defines you may have this many animals, nor do we have a finite policy that says you may have this many canines or this many felines. What's quite common for our shelter under my leadership has been about 400 animals, about 200 dogs, about 200 cats is where we were for several years, 4 years. That was quite common for us. Our cat population at the shelter is way down. We have a fast track program for community cats to be spay neutered by paws and returned to field. So our cat population is quite low. So that created some capacity for cat rooms to be repurposed for canine rooms. One thing that we're fighting locally, and really the southern United States is battling this, is the puppy intake. Canines under 6 months of age for our shelter is up about 30% compared to last year, and they require a lot more care, medical support, and so it's puppies and unwanted litters that are contributing to our space crisis. Because dog intake is not, if you'll allow me a moment, I actually have some stats on this.
Okay.
Maybe they were right here all along. So our total intake is only up about 2.8%. Really, year over year, it's not up much if you look at the aggregate. Livestock and wildlife intake is down like 30%. Very, very limited number of livestock and wildlife coming in. Cats is largely unchanged. I ran this report as of June 30, and we had taken in 900 cats for the same time period last year and 903 this year. So almost right on with cats. I think we have a lot of really great cat programming supporting cats. It's dogs. Dogs are up 11%, which is about 200 more animals. And so finding, for cats, if a cat is a feral, fractious, reactive, a community cat, it has a live outcome, right? But for dogs, the only live outcomes are going back to its owners, because every dog came from somewhere, or adoption, transport. So the bottleneck for dogs with the increased intake for dogs is significant. So being up about 200 animals year to date compared to the same time period last year is what's causing the increase to capacity, really pressing the limits of our capacity at the shelter. In particular, dogs under 6 months of age were up almost 30% on puppies. So the definition of what our capacity is can vary so much. If I have 3 nursing moms in my big kennel room and dog isolation, they could easily have 6 or 8 pups each. Well, that kennel itself does not require much more daily care, but it skews my population to look way high. That's 30 extra animals, right? Or 30 animals that until they're about 4 weeks of age are requiring about the same amount of care as the next kennel. So we define internally just anything over 250 canines, we are we're at high capacity. So we have a rubric that we use in-house that I thought I had brought it with me, but where we spell out those tiers, that anything above 250 is our orange level, if you've seen our meter online. Anything over 275 is our red level, meaning we're at risk for euthanizing for space. And so when I'm reporting to you monthly numbers like that we ended the month at 295 dogs, we're in the red zone at that time. That is dogs in crates, that is not dogs in proper kennels. And so we would say anything at 295 is over capacity and beyond capacity. So June, 137 animals deceased. As I mentioned, that is quite high for us. 85 of that were cats. So we did see a continued panleukopenia on the property, as well as orphan kittens coming in, failure to thrive, significant medical issues related to our neonatal cats. Our cats, 6 months or older, are doing a lot better. It's our very young, very vulnerable cats that we're really struggling to support through June.
What was the increase in the dogs from May to June in the deceased? Because the dogs were like half of that.
Yes. So in the month of June, we did have some frank conversations about dogs that had reported behavioral issues that could be manageable in the correct home. But being over capacity for a couple of months at that point, we had to make some tough decisions that those unicorn adopters, those homes that do not have other pets, were not coming. We had a number of dogs, 44 dogs that were long stay dogs that we had documented and known behavioral issues, not necessarily a bite event, but documented reactivity, different behavioral issues. And so because we were at capacity and because we had fully exhausted our resources for each and every one of those animals, we did have to make some tough decisions to go ahead and euthanize those animals to create capacity for those very social dogs coming in to have an appropriate seat at the table to be seen for adoption. And I think you see that our adoptions were up quite a bit. We do try to be transparent with the public about what we're facing. We do ask for that support, and we did have that. We had a number of adopters come forward and say, we hear you're in crisis, we want to help. Contra Valley Paws, of course, has been pushing their foster program and has exponentially increased the number of dogs going into foster. And so we needed that help and we needed that support. But there were a number of dogs in June that we identified were not great candidates for adoption, foster, or transport, and their owners had not come for them. As I mentioned, we had fully exhausted resources for those animals. So for June, we did have 51 dogs either die or were euthanized. A large number of those were long stay dogs that we knew very well, that we had assessed their behavior over multiple incidences and knew that this was the choice for them at that time. So you'll see that also reflected in the number of aggressive animals euthanized. We have the 44 aggressive animals listed there, and then 93 were either sick or injured. And so that did increase our percentage of our outcomes by type. That did increase our percent that were released, that were not live released, to, I believe, 16%. I'm sorry, 15%. And so June was a tough month. We do identify it as a one-off. We did change a little bit of our philosophy about once we have several documented instances about a dog, we don't continue to hold on to that dog for an inordinate amount of time, that we will continue to exhaust all resources for each and every animal and make sure that they get the due care and attention that they need, but we will some of the animals that we considered euthanasia on were approaching their second anniversary at the shelter. They may have left on adoption for a short period of time or gone on different visits out of the shelter, but were largely our animals through that duration. And really, those adopters were not coming. We did not have the right population of adopters to match with these animals that did have these documented behavioral issues. So that is your June report.
Are there any other questions? If not, moving on to item 4D, discussion and possible action related to monthly shelter numbers for July of 2022.
So for July, we always do a lot of community outreach in advance of the Independence Day holiday. Nationwide, Independence Day is a tough time for shelters. For a couple years now, we've had very manageable intake after Independence Day, and I think it is related to our community being aware of the things they need to do to prevent their pets from getting loose, or if they find a pet, to know what to do. Also, in advance of the Independence Day holiday, we held a massive microchip clinic event. We had planned to do about 350 microchips for free out of donated funds for the community. So many people pre-registered that we actually doubled that. And in a 3-day event, we implanted 605 microchips to community pets. People were hungry for that kind of support and that service, and so we wanted to make sure that each of those pets were able to get in compliance with city ordinance and take advantage of a free resource in our microchips. We also did a lot of social media and traditional media about, secure your pets, don't take them to the family barbecue, be aware of, fireworks shows and even unlawful fireworks displays going on in your community. So for July, we did see a decrease in our intake to 325 animals. Not only was that a decrease from June 2022, it was also a decrease just compared to July the prior year. Our work is so seasonal that when we talk about July 2022, it's good to refer to July 2021 to know, excuse me, what to expect in the coming month. And so we actually had a 20% decrease in intake compared to July 2021. We do largely attribute that to the community coming out in support of us, already being in a space crisis. Please be neighborly, be friendly, know your neighborhood pets, connect with your neighbors and community members. We had 108 adoptions, over 100 animals transferred out, 71 animals claimed by their owner, a little tick up in wildlife with 31 animals wildlife released, 82 deceased, and 472 animals left in custody. That was 380 on-site at the shelter, 82 at Contra Valley Paws, and 10 off-site. So we didn't quite hit 80% for the month, so that is below goal, but it is much improved from prior months. So you'll see dog deaths were about half the prior month. We do predict that June 2022 was a tough time that will not be duplicated, and 55 cats died. So we saw a relief from our cat illness that was going on there. That's still a lot of cats, but it is like 40% less than prior months that we have just reported. So that is an improvement. We do believe that decreasing our pet population, even if by euthanasia, did create the bandwidth to provide additional care and medical for cats that maybe weren't getting that attention because we were so full with canines. So because we didn't quite hit goal for July, we do see the percentage of outcomes deceased up to 16%. So we are a few months in the row now of missing that 90% target that is identified as no-kill. So we are at risk of not making no-kill for the year. I predict we'll be at about 84% instead of 90%. Our fiscal year ends September 30, so we really only have 2 more months left in the year to report. But we're stressing to our staff and our partners and to you all that our life-saving programming is still valuable and is still working and is still good. And those animals that are saved and are being adopted are benefiting from that programming. And so it is a tough year nationwide. It's a tough year for the southern United States in particular. And we're hearing that from our mentor groups and our weekly national leadership calls that really everyone is facing this. And that doesn't make it okay, but at least we know like we're trying everything. If there was more to do, we would be doing it. And we are just... Even if we end the year at less than 90%, it doesn't mean that that no-kill is abandoned. It simply means that we had a tough year, and we will continue to try our hardest for each and every one of the animals in our custody.
Are there any questions?
Is the CHIP initiative that went on in July, is that part of the next section to keep them home?
Yes, sir.
Then I'll wait.
Thank you. So we, I'm sorry,
No, you're fine.
you can.
Moving on to 4E, discussion and possible action on Keep Them Home Intake Diversion Initiative.
So some feedback that we're getting from our national leadership with Pets Alive and the Human Animal Support System is to really encourage language around Keep Them Home, the Keep Them Home initiative, and that we have a really great study that came out of the city of Dallas. So we love a Texas community. We love a community also in the southern United States. Please don't compare me to communities in Colorado. Definitely compare me to communities in my home state. And so we shared some information about Keep Them Home and keeping families together, largely supported by data that came out of this study out of the city of Dallas. As I mentioned a moment ago, our cat intake is largely unchanged. It is, this space crisis is entirely supported by our increased canine intake. I actually went over all of this earlier, so thank you for that opportunity. So the Keep Them Home initiative and this language that we're sharing specifically, there are several things about keeping them home. Some of them is making sure that pets are microchipped. It is required by city ordinance. We do offer it for $13 any day of the week, but hosting large-scale microchip clinics like the one we just did does get hundreds of animals in our community and beyond. We didn't limit it to just San Angelo residents, get them microchipped. There's also a component of the Keep Them Home initiative that is very joyfully called No Naked Dogs, and it is get a collar and a tag on every dog. Your neighbor, your colleagues, your community members are not going to have a microchip scanner, and so investing in collars and tags is something that Concho Valley Paws offers quite frequently, and it is another initiative to fund and to support No Naked Dogs. That's another component of Keep Them Home. The biggest component that we've shared so far is, San Angelo is a community of helpers. When there's a car accident, how many calls does dispatch get for one, vehicle collision? There's we're a community where we all know each other. If we talk long enough, I'm going to figure out like 5 people we know that we have in common. And so we want to just continue to support that and through our Keep Them Home language. So first in this language that we're sharing with the community is keep them home by knowing your neighbors. Hey, my neighbor's boyfriend just moved in and he's got a little white terrier dog. Just getting to know your neighbors and making sure you know your neighbors. One statistic that we say again and again that was really, really impactful to us is that 70% of lost dogs are found less than 1 mile from their home. And so that was documented through a tremendous amount of data that ran through the city of Dallas and has been supported and duplicated in other communities, that the vast majority of animals are just are very close to their home neighborhood. Another statistic is, so 70% are found within 1 mile of their home, but 42% are found within 400 feet of their front door. So a good many animals are right there. They are just right there by their home neighborhood. Should they be secure in their yard? Absolutely. Should they be inside in a crate? Whatever it takes. But also, if you're stopping and rendering aid, hey, I see this dog that's loose. I want to get involved. I want to help. Just know she likely belongs just right there. We had a super, super fluffy, healthy, cute husky mix come in. We named her Alibi. She was beautiful. We wanted to make sure she stayed healthy. We got vaccines in her right away. We put her in a clean puppy room. Hours later, her owner shows up. Very quickly. And she's like, do you potentially have my puppy. And we look, and the dog was picked up literally at the curb in front of the residence. And so we want to make sure that citizens are safe. We want them to make choices that they're comfortable with. But, you know, she's a tiny floof. She can't have gone far. You know, knock on the door. She likely belongs right there. And so there are so many stories like that. In particular, our shelter, it's not unusual, but our shelter is miles north of town. The vast majority of neighborhoods do not, you know, Paul Ann is right there, so that's very good. But so much of our community and so much of our neighborhoods have to travel 6+ miles to get to my facility. So keeping them in their home neighborhoods and knowing just how close they are to their family of origin and their home residence is just so valuable to know to prevent a shelter intake and that animal being taken miles out of its home neighborhood.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying on that. The flip side from my position is that a lot of people are afraid to go knock on the door. Even though we are a small community, I love this community because it's so...
Oh, I'm sorry, Sergeant. Can you put on your mic?
Oh. Sorry. But anyways, yeah, the dealing with a lot of the community, it's just, we get people that call in and say, I don't want to go knock on the door because I don't want somebody to open up and be a man yelling at me and stuff. And it's, if they bring them to the animal shelter, that's usually, to me, the case, is that they don't want to go knocking on the door disturbing people or getting somebody upset or anything. I'm a proponent of, yeah, just going and knock on the door because there's no such thing as a stupid question or something like that. So it's kind of re-education, you know, I guess, you know, hey, get to know your neighbors, get to know your people, because I guess we're the oldest in here. Yes, but the mentality's changed, you know, of getting to know your neighbors to just leave me alone.
Right, and one thing, there is that risk. We definitely don't want people to enter an unsafe situation, but also interacting with a dog you don't know can also be an unsafe situation. And so what we also want to prevent is, you know, if a dog is not a danger to itself or others, and what I mean by that is if a dog is staying out of the street, right? Like they are in a yard, they are on the curb, they are where, maybe leave them be, right? Like the last thing I want is a citizen to say, oh, what a cute puppy, let me help. I load it in the car, the dog bites you while you're like picking it up. Or you get in the car and you're driving down the road and the dog starts growling at you. These are calls that we get quite frequently as well. They get to the shelter and they're like, I tried to help and now I have a bite wound, or now I have a dog growling at me, I can't even get it out of my own vehicle. And so to some extent, if an animal is not a danger to itself and it's loose, right, and that's not okay, still call us for sure. Like we're going to respond to loose stray dogs every time. But there's a risk in knocking on the door and not knowing whose door you're knocking on, but there's also a risk in loading up a strange animal that you don't know into your vehicle. There's risk involved in that kind of transaction inherently just anyway. So if an animal's not a danger to itself, maybe leave it be. If an animal's a danger to others, like, hey, I pulled over to help this loose dog, but it's growling at me and charging at me, I had to jump in my car, then for sure call us for that as well. And so if an animal's not a danger to itself or others, consider leaving it be. It will wander home. Its owners will come home for lunch and say, oh my gosh, that's my dog. How did it get out? So definitely call us for any loose stray dog. But if an animal's a danger to itself or others, we'll escalate that call as well. We don't want citizens to get into unsafe situations just because they were trying to do a good thing. So the Keep Them Home initiative is very largely centered around canines. I'll admit that there's not a lot of cat programming in this, but it's because we learned so much just about dog behavior. And so, as I mentioned, in most cases, lost dogs simply aren't going very far from home. These dogs do belong in a residence, do belong in a backyard. We want them to be reunited with families. Not only did this study in Dallas study the intake of animals, it also surveyed the residents of Dallas. And they said 98% of residents consider pets to be important members of the family. Well, all of us in this room would look at each other and say, well, of course, I would do anything for my pet. But even citizens who are living in our target neighborhoods, even citizens who are marginalized, who are on the poverty line, who have issues with reliable transportation, have issues with a language barrier when they walk into the shelter, even citizens who have a distrust of government, even those families love their pet and would like their pet back. But each of those items I just listed are barriers to them commuting across the town to my shelter, walking in, paying the impound fees, getting their pet back. It is in everyone's best interest for those pets to stay in their home neighborhood for 48 hours. Please just try to connect with your neighbors. We have lost a lot of that neighborly attitude where I'm working in the front yard, my neighbor is as well, we catch up on the grandkids, but there is so much technology now. Post the found dog on the Nextdoor app, post it on the social media, the Facebook groups for San Angelo Lost Pets. Take that extra step. If you do get involved in secure a lost pet, just take those extra steps over the next 48 hours to really invest in that pet getting back to its home area. So that's the language about just hang on to the dog for 48 hours before delivering to the shelter. And when you arrive at the shelter after the 48-hour period, we'll say, thank you so much for investing in this pet. You clearly want this animal set up for success. You want a good outcome for this animal. Would you consider entering our Good Samaritan program where we vaccinate the pet, we scan for microchip if you haven't done so already. Well, we do anyway, just to double check. And do you want to hold on to the animal another 3 days, just while those vaccines kick in, so that when it comes into the shelter, it is set up for success and protected against any medical issues. And in that time frame, you may have had that additional time to connect with owners. You may have identified a potential adopter. A Facebook friend says, actually, that's a pretty good looking dog. I'd like to adopt it. And so for citizens that enter our Good Samaritan program, we do follow up after the 3 days with an email and say, hey, did you connect with the owner organically through your own channels, or reminder, you're open for a shelter intake at this time. Thank you for holding on to this pet a few more days. Or did you responsibly adopt out this pet to one of your a member of your circle? If so, have them be sure they come by and implant a microchip. We do believe that a stray process has been followed and they can be now identified as the owner and come in and register that pet as their very own. We do want to support San Angelo Pets, but we want to reserve our resources, the finite city budget, the fundraised Concho Valley Paws budget for our most vulnerable animals, for sick and injured animals, for those animals that are truly homeless. The vast majority of dogs are owned and have a family somewhere. And maintaining that family bond and preventing a break in that family bond is what's in the best interest for that animal and in the best interest for that family and in the best interest for our operations long term.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'll circle back to that chip question. Having the chip thing that we did in July, it's more like an insurance policy, to have in case the dog does get out or the animal gets out or so forth. Is that the first one we've done in a while?
It is the first one we had done in a while. We had one scheduled in early 2020, but you can imagine why that was canceled. And then there continued to be uncertainty around hosting large events related to the spread of illness. And so we did cancel our 2020 microchip clinic. And then in 2021, there was still just a lot of uncertainty about, what was safe, what we were comfortable with. And as a leader in community health, we didn't want to be the ones hosting a large-scale event that did, spread human disease. So this microchip event was the first one we've had since 2019.
Okay, so we try to do one once a year?
We do. We usually do a free one in a target neighborhood annually, and then a normal priced one elsewhere in the community annually. So we usually host 2 microchips a year, but we'll do this microchip clinic was double really average microchip clinics the community was hungry for it, I think because we hadn't had one in so long.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of what I was wondering, but has there been any study to see how effective that is? You know, keeps track of the group of chips that were dispersed and how many animals come in. And, I mean, we're hoping, like I said, they're all staying home. It's, like I said, an insurance policy just in case. But has there been a percentage of how many are brought in that got chipped during a certain event and we were able to get them back to the owners?
Right. We really watched that closely. You know, we held this event in advance of an Independence Day with the anticipation of having a lot of intake of dogs, hopefully chipped through this event. To date, we've taken in one dog of the 605. Now, the 605 was cats and dogs. But from the microchip event, one animal has come into the shelter from that event and was quickly reunited with its owners. And one other customer contacted us and said, hey, my animal was chipped through the event. My animal is missing. Do you have it? And we did not have it, but they did connect with their neighbors that had picked it up and got their pet back. So is that unusual? Sure, 605 animals microchipped, not one of them, or only one of them has been into the shelter since. I think that that's indicative of our customer base. Those citizens that did opt to take advantage of the microchip clinic were those citizens that also made sure their pet is secure each day before they leave for work, make sure that their pet is well cared for and not running loose. So it's an investment in responsible pet ownership. Those citizens also received information on spay-neuter vouchers offered through Contra Valley Paws at the time of the event. We're also following up with each of any citizens that indicated they live inside city limits and their pet was not spay-neutered at the time of the microchip clinic. We're emailing them and staying in touch with them. We had a really great opportunity. Our communications department that supports us so greatly made an online form to register for the microchip clinic. And when they did that, they created a database of our customers. It's a little tough to pull information from our pet management software, but we have hundreds now of customers that registered online for the microchip clinic. I have all their contact information, and so we're communicating with them and saying, hey, Paws is having a voucher sale coming up. Be sure and take advantage. We also have another at least 200 citizens that registered for the microchip clinic but had not yet taken advantage of it. So after the event, we contacted each of them and said, or we're in the process of still contacting each of them and saying, hey, reminder, you missed the microchip clinic, the free clinic, but we offer the microchips for $13 any day of the week. That's still a bargain. Please come by, take advantage of the microchip services. So we're building that community rapport and relationship to invest in responsible pet ownership.
Are we also encourage them about updating their moving if they move?
Yes. So we make sure that at the time of implant, we make sure that they're aware that our microchip through 24 Pet Watch, there's no annual fee. There's no fee to update your information. So when a citizen calls and says, hey, my pet was microchipped through y'all and now it's missing, we go ahead and just verbally confirm, hey, I do show your pet here. It is registered. I want to confirm you're still at 3142 Highway 67 North and this is a good contact number. Okay, great. That's attached to your pet's microchip. Whoever picks up your pet will have access to this information to get connected with you. We also share through our social media and just static on our website all the time. If your pet was microchipped through us, the phone number to contact the microchip company is available to call and update any of your information. So we have some information on microchipping that we're sharing on Monday social media through the city that says, like microchipping, what's the big deal? And be sure and take advantage of microchipping. But also if you're already microchipped, make sure your information is current. We also take advantage of something that we call stray light savings time. You know, there was an old push, I don't know, decades ago, where, hey, every time the clock changes, every time you change your clocks for daylight savings time, check your smoke alarms. Make sure all your batteries are current on your smoke alarms. We extended that to say, hey, also at daylight savings time, call your microchip companies. Make sure your annual fee's paid up. Make sure your contact information is current. And if it's through the city, we're happy to update that for you, or here's the phone number to the microchip company to do that.
Any other questions? That concludes all regular agenda items. Do we have any follow-up or administrative issues to announce?
I do not.
I just wanted to ask one more question since we got to this part. Like I said, second meeting, still got questions. But you said something earlier, I think it might have been June's or something, about dogs within this area and stuff. But I know sometimes animals get transported to other states and or other areas. Is there a study that checks to see what breeds are popular in certain parts of the state or country compared to, like say, hey, we got these, can you all intake these, and we'll intake some of these that do well in our area or anything? I mean, I know it's kind of hard because those are usually volunteers transporting animals, right, usually?
Yeah, so it's in our contract with Concho Valley Paws that they offer a large-scale transport program, and Jen Murphy is actually the lead over that program and is the expert in those operations. I would say nationwide, for over a decade, the pet overpopulation is Chihuahuas and Pit Bulls. That is across the nation, year after year, unchanged. Concho Valley Paws has done investments in the past where they offer specific spay-neuter vouchers for pit bulls, for chihuahuas, to try to mitigate that. When we connect with a new rescue partner, they say, you don't have a lot of tan chihuahuas, do you? Everyone's overrun with tan chihuahuas right now. We've gotten real creative. We're like, is it tan or is it red? Is it blonde? Can we be more specific? Because if I go into my small dog room one more time and say, all right, I've got one more tan chihuahua, is it this tan one or that tan one? We are really diligent when we send an animal on transport. We send it to communities that are already no-kill. We are not in a position to accept right now from other communities. We don't do any transports in from other groups. So when our transports go out, some large-scale transports of dozens of dogs on a van, some smaller groups of more local groups of sending, this mom with litter or this half a dozen puppies. We're making sure that those are going to areas that are not, we don't want animals in that community to suffer and be at risk of euthanasia because we're sending pets there. There's ample room. And so transports have been our bread and butter for several years now. We've been sending over 1,000 animals on transport for maybe 3 years in a row now. And that's struggling this year as well because everyone is having a space crisis, because the southern United States is really struggling in particular. Our transport program is, let me tell you, if it can be done, Jen Murphy's going to make it happen. We are connecting with new rescue transfers all the time, rescue organizations all the time. The state of Colorado, as an example, they made a statewide database of receiving agencies, and just every rescue in Colorado, what will they take as far as breeds, or behavior, and they have this statewide database now, and they are on fire to help Texas in particular. The nation is on fire for Texas, but as we got further into the year, we found that even they don't have room right now. Nobody has room. And so we're leaving no stone unturned. We're being diligent with all kinds of responses and outreaches to those rescue groups. We have a lot of infrastructure in place to do those transports as volunteers and drivers and staff members and all of that. Medical, the tremendous medical investment that can be part of that. But we're really leaving no stone unturned there.
Well, that's kind of what I was going. You were talking about receiving. I was just seeing, first question, I mean, what is our percentage of pits and chihuahuas here locally?
As far as annual intake, I could get you those figures. As far as
Well, I mean,
population,
just like right now, in July, you had 200 or 497.
it's not uncommon. Half our dog population is some kind of pit bull
50%?
mix.
Okay. So, but what I was kind of getting at was like these other agencies in the nation and the state, what breeds are mostly adopted, in certain parts of the state and stuff. I mean, the dogs that would probably stay in a shelter short term. Mm-hmm. I understand about the pits and chihuahuas. Yeah, everywhere you go, you see pits and chihuahuas. But I'm just kind of wondering, if we have breeds besides that do get adopted more in Amarillo or they in New Mexico or something like that. You know, if we could relieve some of that housing. I mean, I was just kind of wondering that. That was kind of my question.
Yeah, so we work with a number of breed-specific rescues, and we have a good luck moving huskies. We connected recently with a lab rescue, took a mom and their whole litter. The breed-specific rescues are not our bread and butter. It's often, you know, all breed rescues, but they want, you know, these 5 working dogs or this, and so they'll take a pretty good mix. We've had a large number of our transports right now are puppies, which thank goodness, we are so overrun with puppies, and dogs under 20, 25 pounds. So even if they are Chihuahuas, they would consider them. The puppies, even if they're pit bull mixy looking, if they're under a certain age, they are still saying yes to those dogs.
Are we forecasting in the future that the economic swing's going to have an impact on the shelters?
We're in it.
I know we're in it. But
Yeah, for sure. I guess as far as forecasting, this space crisis we're in and this economic thing that's coming, we don't know when it'll be over. And so we are leaning heavily on our national leadership. They're giving us indicators. They get the aggregate data. And so they're telling us, guys, your summer's going to be tough. Guys, your winter, you didn't have the winter break. And we're like, thank you. We noticed that locally, but thank you for at least we know that everyone's experiencing this. We would feel terrible if we became no kill last year and then somehow we missed it this year. And it's not us, and it's not our programming, it's not our investments. It's a tough time for everyone, and we don't know when that will be over.
So if we wanted to get something out to the public, it's that we're in the red and we're probably going to have to make some tough decisions, like you mentioned in the last meeting.
We're sharing that weekly on our Facebook.
Yeah, to try to keep us out of the kill situation.
Yeah, and we're hosting Clear the Shelter is a nationwide adoption event promoted by our NBC affiliates, and so Contra Valley Paws was able to coordinate with NBC to parcel that out into several adoption events throughout the month, and so you'll see that on our social media as well. And so we're doing all the things, and we'll continue to do so even as we have to make tough decisions. You know, we have a protocol, for example, for rehabbing feral dogs. It's a rare thing, but we do occasionally get feral dogs. We have a protocol for that, but we don't have the resources right now to invest in feral dogs. So there are decisions we're making that we ordinarily would give those animals more time, that we are not in a position to do so right now.
Any other questions? If there aren't any more, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay. That was, hear a motion from Member Aker
I'll second that.
and a second from Member Murphy. Calling for the vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. And meeting adjourned at 1:05 p.m.